Hello guys, and welcome back to Off the Rails, your fortnightly video gaming podcast with me, the offrailgamer. This is episode 4, and I'm continuing the discussion around local multiplayer games. Can you believe that another 2 weeks have passed since I last addressed you? For my part, I'm hoping your answer to that question is yes, and you've been eagerly awaiting this next instalment. If not, and you're thinking to yourself, oh, not this guy again, I would wonder why you're putting yourself through this, but please do stick with me. I'm still new to podcasting, but I hope you'll agree that I'm getting a little better at it as time goes on. I'm at least starting to feel more comfortable talking to myself in an empty room once every couple of weeks, which might be cause for concern in itself. This brings me on nicely to my first point for today's podcast though, and something I haven't really brought up properly since episode 1, and that is socials. I put links to all my social media accounts in the podcast description, so if you'd like to, please feel free to reach out on Twitter, as that's probably the most likely place that I'll see your comment, and let's start a conversation. As I've said previously, as long as you keep it clean, I'll try and include as many of you guys' thoughts as possible. I'm not expecting a sudden influx of messages at this time, but maybe down the line, if I get enough engagement, we could introduce a new segment to the podcast around what you all have to say. Now, I should note here that I'm not verified on any social media platforms, but if you follow my links, you'll get through to me. Anyway, that's probably enough on that for now, so let's press on with the first part of the show, and I'll catch you all up on what I've been playing recently. And as always, this is the part of the podcast where I get my plug-in for my YouTube channel, offrailgamer. If you follow the link in the podcast description, you'll see all the many videos I've uploaded. But most recently, you'll see I've continued with the retro streak I've been on lately with some old school Nintendo. In the last 2 episodes, I've captured gameplay from a neat little device I got on the TikTok shop. I hasten to add here that I am in no way affiliated with, nor on the payroll of this company, and this is by no means an advertisement for them. But it does only seem fair to give a quick mention to Arcade Systems, who are selling a couple of retro game sticks, which operate much like a Fire Stick, in that they simply plug into the HDMI port in the back of your telly, and you're ready to go. The device comes with 2 wireless controllers, so, and this seems mightily relevant to the topic of this week's podcast, you can buddy up or go head-to-head with a friend in any of the nearly 3,000 NES and SNES games designed to support multiplayer. Now, like I say, this isn't an endorsement, but if you head over to YouTube, you'll see I recently uploaded a video on Biker Mice from Mars and Micro Machines, 2 racing games from the perspective of an aerial view. In this video, I expressed a little concern as the Biker Mice game was plastered with blatant and very explicit advertising for a famous chocolatey nutty snack that older listeners may remember as Marathon. Beyond my accidental corporate marketing, for which I promise you I earned no commission, Biker Mice allows you to race as any of the 3 hero anthropomorphic rodents or well-known baddies from the TV show. Characters come with their own customized vehicle. So, unlike modern Mario Kart games, you can choose your racer, but not their wheels. As you win races, you earn money and can buy upgrades to your tyres and engine, or you may wish to buy weapons to give your opponents a disadvantage as you progress, or you could buy a sweet treat to give your chosen racer a little boost. After all, you're not you when you're hungry. I'll stop. Unfortunately, my skills were tested a little too far, and Vinny found himself failing to qualify for round 2 of racing. He did a bit better than Spider, though. In Micro Machines, I competed as Fonz impersonator Spider, who proved about as good at handling a high-speed vehicle as Richard Hammond, spending at least as much time careening off the track as keeping all 4 wheels on the track. I really lived up to my off-rail namesake, coming 4th out of 4 in every race. Next on the channel, I had a look at a bit of pinball, playing tables influenced by Steam Railroad Pioneers, the works of Bram Stoker and Mary Shelley, and Wallace and Gromit's Grand Day Out. There was even a totally rad beatbox-inspired table that screamed 80s and early 90s vibes. This was a slightly shorter episode, as it's a bit tricky to build content around pinball. Unless you're the Who, but the less said about them the better. The dirty old gits. This did, however, rekindle my love for pinball video games, and after I finished recording, I took myself over to the Microsoft store and picked up a free download of 3D Pinball Space Cadet. Who among you remembers this flawless gem of a game that came packaged as standard with Windows XP back in the mid-2000s? If you need something to refresh your memory, a sneak peek at my TikTok, link in the description, for a very short blast from the past. Aside from pinball and retro sticks, I also took myself back to Red Dead Redemption, where I'm very sorry to say Arthur has now contracted tuberculosis, though he doesn't know it yet. On the other hand, it gives me great pleasure to let you know that Micah Bell still remains exactly where he belongs, behind bars in the jail in Strawberry. I've instead been completing as many challenges and side quests as possible to postpone releasing gaming's biggest gobshite as long as possible. I do have to say though, and please excuse my strong language, Gambling Challenge 8 can kiss my big hairy bum. It's frustrating to say the least. In my pinball episode that went up at the weekend, I mentioned that I was away on yet another road trip, and you best believe I took my retro stick with me to challenge my travel companions to a contest of strength in Capcom's Street Fighter 2. No doubt they'll tell you they let me win, but had I taken the Elgato along as well, I think you'd clearly see it was my superior button mashing that earned my well-deserved victory, and as this is my podcast, they're not here to tell you otherwise. And that's pretty much what I've been playing recently, so now let's turn our attention to a returning segment which was missing last time out. Let's talk gaming news. To kickstart this segment, rather than gaming news, I'm going to bring up some gaming olds, in two senses. One, I want to talk about something that was announced a week or two ago, and two, the announcement is something retro. You may have seen on YouTube some months ago that I uploaded an episode playing Blaze Entertainment's Evercade. And of course, you may not have seen that episode. Nevertheless, the announcement that's got me all hyped up was made in the recent Evercade showcase. This November, I think, we're seeing the release of 2 Duke Nukem Collection cartridges, which are going to include the old 2D side-scrollers, as well as 3D Duke. Now, it's not my place to go advertising these, so I won't go on too much longer, besides which November's a ways off yet, so let's take a breath and get excited closer to the release date. There's also some other upcoming releases that have my attention, and one that I'm also incredibly excited for is Cities Skylines 2. However, we've almost as long to wait, as this is currently listed to drop 24th of October this year. I love this city planner, and can't wait to find out what new features and mechanics the sequel will give us. But what about news, I hear you ask? Surely you must have some news! Well, in case you missed it, we saw the Xbox showcase at the weekend, which at long last showed us a cinematic trailer for a new Fable game! Now, I find this very exciting, as it has been a long old wait for the next game in this franchise series, which is one that I personally have a lot of time for. Not only that, but if the cinematic truly is anything to go by, we could be expecting to play out our own Jack and the Beanstalk-esque showdown with literal giants appearing on the scene. No release date has yet been given, so this is one we'll just have to keep our eyes on. Other notable announcements at this year's showcase included a 10th October Forza Motorsport drop, a new 1TB Xbox Series S digital console, and a new game from Obsidian Entertainment called Avowed. Avowed caught my attention, although it looks like gameplay will be from a first-person perspective, so only time will tell if this is going to be my cup of tea or not. From the trailer shown though, there's some kind of plague that has affected the local population of bears, causing them to break out in pustules or hives. I was left wanting to find out more, and it definitely seems to have potential for being very good. It did put me a little in mind of 2019's Greedfall, but will hopefully offer enough unique features to warrant checking out for itself. And that, I think, is enough news for this week. If you've stuck with me this far, well done on swallowing all your vegetables down. It's time for the main event. We're talking local multiplayer, and in the earlier segment I mentioned the game stick that I brought on the TikTok shop. Well, at the weekend, I was on the road again, not entirely unlike Willie Nelson, with a few pals of mine, and due to the very easily transportable nature of the device, I took that little bad boy along and loaded up some Street Fighter 2 back at the hotel. Furthermore, this particular road trip took my fellow adventurers and I to the great city of Manchester, and to NQ64, a bar that boasts a variety of retro arcade machines and old-school video game consoles. Considering I gave mention to the first title in the series as one of my highly rated local multiplayer games in the last podcast, you can rest assured that we certainly booted up some Time Splitters too. And I legit won the 2 rounds that I played. You can ask anyone, and if they try to deny it, they're lying. So there. Anyway, what were we talking about? Oh yes, I'm continuing my list of local multiplayer video games that I consider worthy of a shout-out. My first entry this week is Worms. I think I first played Worms, which has you take control of an army of 4 anthropomorphic invertebrates armed to the teeth with shotguns, bazookas, holy hand grenades, and super sheep, and take the fight to the opposing team, on the Nintendo Game Boy, which allowed pass and play between friends. But the version that I really sank a lot of hours into was on the Sony PlayStation, or PS1 as it's now known. My friends and I would strategize using the blowtorch to tunnel underground or carefully placing girders in an effort to defend against airstrike or homing missile attacks before then unleashing hellfire upon one another, or secretly dropping dynamite down a recently constructed bunker, proving such efforts totally futile. I'm sure anyone listening to this podcast will be familiar with Worms, but for anyone who has never played, gameplay is turn-based and timed, necessitating some quick thinking to maximize the amount of damage you can inflict on the enemy. Also, players must keep an eye on the wind speed and direction and adjust the power of their next shot accordingly to avoid overshooting or indeed falling short of the mark. Over the years, there have been many iterations of Worms games, each reaching ever wackier new highs with silly catchphrases, absurd weapons lists, and crazy new environments to duke it out in. For me, this franchise remains an absolute classic that has delivered hours of entertainment, and really is one of those games that is, for me, the epitome of local multiplayer gaming. In much more recent times, we have seen the release of Unravel 2, a sequel to Yarny's first outing, this time allowing 2 people to tackle puzzles cooperatively. Unravel is a fantastic game where players take control of Yarny, a character made out of a ball of wool. The game sees you run and jump through the world, playing out as a side-scrolling platformer. Because Yarny is made of wool, however, he can cast off lines that can be tied to interactive elements, such as tree branches, winches, and the like, to swing from one platform to another, or to build bridges that can be used to position crates or other objects, allowing access to higher areas. In Unravel 2, Yarny is caught in a storm at sea and is soon shipwrecked on a beach. The good news is that our hero washes up next to a chest, in which we find a new friend, a second Yarny, with whom the adventure continues. Henceforth, the second Yarny can be controlled by a friend, and you share the screen to solve puzzles and progress through levels together. In addition to the new cooperative element delivering a shared experience for players, the challenges set are also a little more complex, requiring that you work together effectively to get through the game. Both Unravel and its sequel are beautiful games that weave delicate stories, almost like a spinning yarn, right? If you haven't played these titles yourself yet, I highly recommend them. And if you'd like to have a look at Unravel 2 before buying, I put a link to the video we posted on the Game Void YouTube channel. You can find said link in the podcast description. Next up, I need to bring up another kart racer. But, having talked about Nintendo's mustachioed mascot 2 weeks ago, today I'm going to discuss PlayStation's marsupial offering in Crash Team Racing. Growing up, the only Bandicoot game I owned was Crash 2, so the release of the Insane trilogy, putting all 3 games on one disc, was very exciting. It was my mate who helped me give Mr. Big a hard time in Time Splitters. Please refer back to the last podcast for more info on that. It sounds a bit wrong otherwise, doesn't it, if you don't know what I'm talking about? Anyway, it was he who owned CTR, and needless to say, he was much better at it than I was as a result, but that didn't make it any less fun. In Crash Team Racing, one chooses a racer from the game's extensive cast, including Crash, Tiny the Tiger, or Professor Neo Cortex. You then take to the tracks, ready to burn some rubber, but with a twist. Much like in Mario Kart, you can pick up objects to use defensively or to weaponize your marvelous motoring machine. By breaking open crates, you can grab a TNT or nitro box that can be launched at your rivals, exploding and causing them to spin out, so that you can either nip past them or else increase the distance between you as you leave them in your dust. I remember there were also defensive shield bubbles to protect you from retaliation, but it's been such a long time since I played that my recollection of the other pickups is now failing me. Alongside being a kart racer, CTR also has a battle mode, the objective of which is to drive around arenas solely with the aim of destroying your enemies by throwing crate pickup items their way. I remember these maps being really great fun to tear around and find vantage points from which to launch secret assaults while the other guy is trying to figure out just where you've gotten to. There are many similarities between Crash Team Racing and Mario Kart. In fact, they're virtually the same game in different skins. But growing up Sony, it was great to see one Mr. Bandicoot and his fellows cruising around courses, leaving a trail of absolute carnage and destruction in their wake. Besides, I had to throw another racing game into the mix, and this one just stands out to me from my childhood. I'm staying on PS1 now, and sticking with the furry friend aesthetic also, but things are looking altogether more feline in Rat Attack. Hardly a classic, and I wouldn't be surprised if there aren't many among you who remember this game, but I nonetheless managed to kill quite a lot of time with this title, particularly in the 2-player versus mode. Rat Attack is a brightly coloured game that immediately puts me in mind of a Tom and Jerry cartoon. You pick from a number of available cats to be your in-game avatar for the purposes of literally rounding up rats. By holding the X button, I think, and running around, you draw out circles in which to trap the verminous infestation. I think there's then a depository area to drop off your captives and bank your score. Levels take place in different rooms in the house, including the living room, bathroom, kitchen, etc., and then take you out into the garden. I'm pretty sure there are boss levels, including a showdown of sorts against the dog that lives in the kennel outside. Talking about this now, I'm thinking Rat Attack deserves to be revisited soon, so keep an eye on my YouTube for a possible upcoming video. In 2-player Rat Attack, you and a friend face off to see who can catch the greater number of rats in a set time. If memory serves me right, which would be pretty impressive given my old age, you battle it out in split screen. I remember when playing as a kid, this always put me in mind of that game in Gladiators, where contenders raced to snatch up coloured balls and lob them into their basket to score points. So, if you haven't played Rat Attack, but you did used to tune into Gladiators every Saturday throughout the 90s and early noughties, just imagine that. But everyone has pointy ears and long tails. Let's get all together more friendly again, as the next game I want to reminisce about is local co-op Champions of Norath. I've only somewhat recently added this title to my personal games collection, but I have very fond memories of 4 of us sitting around the PS2 utilising the multi-tap to get the most out of this fantastic campaign. Champions of Norath plays out almost like a real-time Dungeons & Dragons video game. Players choose their character class from 1. Barbarian Warrior, 2. Wood Elf Ranger, 3. High Elf Cleric, 4. Erudite Wizard, or 5. Dark Knight Shadow Elf. For each class you can also decide whether your character is male or female. This may not seem at all remarkable in the modern day, particularly with the latest 2 Assassin's Creed outings or even Hogwarts Legacy, offering players this same choice. But even today, the role of the video game protagonist is largely a male-dominated occupation. Think then just how progressive Miss Pac-Man was back in the day. Returning to Champions of Norath, though, each character class comes with a unique set of stats, which will require players to adapt their gameplay to get the most out of their chosen character's strengths. The game's plot sees you and your companions teaming up to fight alongside the elves in their ongoing war against the orcs. Being a fantasy game, Champions of Norath takes you on a wild adventure to strange lands, including the nest of a colony of colossal ants. Either that or you get shrunken down to be smaller than an ant as the result of some mischief or shenanigans. I can't fully recall. This week's podcast is a great discussion of partially remembered anecdotes, eh? Anyway, you hack and slash your way through levels, and once you've collected enough XP, or experience points, you can improve your character's stats to be in a better position to face new threats and challenges as the game plays on. I'm really looking forward to popping my copy of this game into my PS2 and revisiting Norath for the first time in just over half the number of years I've fully accumulated now. Crumbs. But I feel like this would work really well as a live stream series. If you're listening to this podcast and have an opinion on that one way or the other, why not drop me a message on Twitter? If there's any call for it, I'll get Streamlabs set up again and catch you over on Twitch. Rampage is the next game that I want to talk about, and this classic title is an absolute banger. Have you ever watched a King Kong or Godzilla movie and come away thinking how cool it would be to put yourself in the centre of all that destructive action? Well, back in the day, Rampage offered precisely that opportunity. Released across many platforms, I picked up a copy for the Sega Master System and have had some wild fun with it. Rampage allows for solo or two-player cooperative play, and you choose from one of three characters: Ralph the Wolf, George the Ape, or Lizzie the Lizard. The objective is then to take to the streets and unleash your monstrous rage on the world before the army retaliation depletes your health core entirely. Your attacks include smashing great holes in the brickwork of the city's skyline and grabbing unsuspecting residents from their rooms to snack on before reducing the building to a pile of rubble. When the army is sent in, you can down choppers out of the sky, stomp on foot soldiers, and Hulk smash tanks and armoured vehicles. This arcade smash-em-up is excellent fun solo, but played with a friend, it makes for a solid afternoon of riotous fun. And finally for this week, if you've already had a sneak peek at the links I popped in the description, you'll see I've linked to Game Void yet again. That's because we had, once upon a time, attempted to tackle this last title with a resounding lack of success. I'm talking about Surgeon Simulator, which, in two-player mode, sees each of you take control of a hand. Only it doesn't, of course, because we had very little control over our surgeon's dexterity. In the last podcast, I talked about Totally Reliable Delivery Service, and its loose controls that see you barely able to navigate your character around the map to deliver the mail. Well, that game has nothing on Surgeon Simulator when it comes to loose controls, and to make things even worse, the first patient you're set loose on requires a heart transplant. At least it's not rocket science or brain surgery, right? Wrong. We were hopeless surgeons in this game, and if you follow the link, you'll find we managed to anaesthetize ourselves more than we did the patient. I'm also not sure that, and in fact I'm hopeful that this is not the case, a surgeon's favourite tool of the trade is a claw hammer. With the rate of blood loss, it's no wonder poor old Bob didn't stand a chance in this world. I bet he wishes he'd gone with Bupa, or trusted in our fantastic NHS rather than trusting his life in the hands of two unqualified surgical lay people, one of whom, me, has the shakiest hands this side of Delaware. Don't worry, it seems to just be a potassium thing that I can largely keep under control by eating the occasional banana. I can't really tell you anything else about Surgeon Simulator, as we never made it past the first level. But boy did we laugh. And that might speak volumes about us as people. But I think more honestly, our hopelessness was so dire that if you didn't laugh, you'd cry. And it's only a game after all. But here's what's not a game. The end of this, episode 4 of Off the Rails podcast. I hope we're getting better at these. If you made it this far, then you have my sincere thanks yet again. If you like the podcast and think you might know someone else that might like it, please share it around. On the other hand, you could send it to someone you really hate. Please check out my YouTube channel, offrailgamer. Links to this and all my other socials in the podcast description. Thank you all for listening, and I'll see you again in 2 days' time on YouTube, or in 2 weeks' time right back here. Bye!